Hello, and welcome to our session today. We're very happy to have you with us. We appreciate your taking time out of your day to attend this, our May Crisis Coach session, Natural Disasters and Your Organization, Planning for Preparedness. And we are looking forward to covering some interesting areas with you about how you can help your organization be more prepared when Mother Nature gets a little upset with us. You can follow us on Twitter at Firestorm Soul. You can be our friend on Facebook at Firestorm Solutions. And we have a hashtag for this session, and it is Crisis Coach. If you use the Crisis Coach hashtag, I will be able to see it and respond to any questions or comments or observations you may have during or after this session. Also, if you would like to ask a question, I can't guarantee that we'll get to it in today's session, but I certainly can assure you that we'll follow up via email. You can use the GoToWebinar dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a little chat section there. You can pop in there and ask a question. We do have a moderator on the background today, Bill Baker, and Bill will assist you as well. And you can also send any questions that you may have after the session or any other comments to webinars@firestorm.com. There will be a paper of this session that covers the slides and the high points that are made. Hopefully there will be many. And that usually is ready within about 24 to 48 hours after our session. So look for that under our resources on our website. And last, you can view a recording of this session or share a recording of this session with a coworker or a peer on our YouTube channel. And that will be, a link to that will be included in an email to you post-session. So enough of our administrivia. You know us, we're Firestorm, and Firestorm empowers you to manage risk and crisis. Our expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is the crisis coach. This presentation is not complete without any accompanying oral comments and discussion. Our lawyers want you to know that any work product provided by Firestorm must be read in conjunction with all guidance given by national, regional, local authorities, as well as your company's personal counsel. And the information given should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. I'd like to introduce to you a special guest for us today. This webinar is sponsored by the University of Alabama and their College of Continuing Studies. And I'd like to introduce Mary Patterson. Mary, welcome. And I think you have some programs you'd like to talk to us about today before we get started.
Yes, I do. Good morning, everyone, and welcome from the University of Alabama, the campus here in Tuscaloosa. I hope you're all having a wonderful, beautiful day like we are here. We are delighted to partner with Firestorm and promote crisis management understanding and thought leadership. And in keeping with our discussion of crisis management, you know, we realize that we live in a VUCA world that is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And we are having a workshop seminar that's coming up in September on leadership agility. And it is September 19th through the 21st. It will be in Birmingham. And we would like to invite all of you to go to our website and take a look at this workshop. It is very important for businesses, their leaders, and their workforce to develop agility and to become focused, fast, and flexible in order to be successful in today's world. And we have Dr. Nick Horny as our speaker who will be providing this workshop. He has authored and co-authored many books on agility, and he will bring a great workshop. We want to answer the questions, why is building an agile organization important? how does agility create long-term business success, and what does agility accomplish? So we hope that you'll all go to our website. That's bamaatwork.ua.edu, and you can click on all workshops and then click on leadership agility, and you'll have more information there about this workshop and other workshops that we offer. We offer seminars and workshops on leadership, talent, and business with courses offered online, on-site, and on campus. So we hope that you'll check out our website there and take a look at it. I look forward to seeing many of you hopefully at our workshop.
And Mary, we look forward to that session. I'm glad to share that you can find more information at the bamaatwork.ua.edu website. And Mary, also, if you have a moment, I'd like to introduce you to our co-presenter today, Jim Satterfield. Jim Satterfield is the Chief Executive Officer of Firestorm. And Jim, why don't you go ahead and say hello?
Hello, if you can hear me. I am at the Atlanta airport today, and the background noise you hear is the chaos that's normally at an airport. So, Karen, I'm going to go on mute, and then when you need me say something, I'm going to drop off the internet connection but remain on the voice connection, okay?
Okay, and Jim, you sound great. I don't hear any background noise.
I don't either.
Oh.
Good morning, Jim. It's so nice to talk with you.
Look forward to it, and I'll be over in your neck of the woods next week talking
Wonderful.
about cyber breach at a conference, so we'll look forward to that with everyone. And the University of Alabama does have a host of options that can be a direct benefit to your organization. So, Karen, I'll go back to you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Jim. And thanks, everyone, again, for joining us today. Okay, let's get started. Last month, we discussed what keeps you up at night, and we talked about things that we know are challenges for our organizations. That could be a loss of life, and it might not necessarily be on your property because of something that happened within your organization. It could just be the loss of life of someone, which is a tragic event. There could be, however, an injury on your property. Maybe there's a major supplier interruption or an interruption to your supplier of your supplier. And that really comes into play when we're talking about natural disasters. Everything may be fine in your part of the country, but do you know what's going on elsewhere, especially from those ports of call where your materials or goods or parts are incoming? We have epidemic and pandemic risks, especially in the case of a natural disaster. We can have challenges with the quality of water, with hospital care, with the ability to get to care, which can cause additional stresses on our medical and health system. And of course, as our businesses start to respond to a natural disaster or a crisis of any kind, we have a challenge where we may lose perhaps a major income source, major client, or others that impact our business. We may have a public brand or damage event, and we're going to talk about this a little bit because the way you respond to a crisis has a direct impact on your brand. Resiliency is a brand attribute. One of the things that is frightening for all of us right now, number one, is a hacking, a leak, or a data breach. And I think for all of us watched what happened over the weekend with the ransomware attack, we need to be more diligent and more aware than ever. And while this ransomware attack came into a port and wasn't necessarily the result of phishing, I will ask all of you on the phone today to please practice good computing and stop opening emails when you don't know where they come from, or attachments that say, hey, Joe, here's your invoice, or using 12345 as your password. So please just do that one thing for us today, and it'll go a long way to helping us all. And then there can be a failure of senior leadership. It's detrimental to the organization, and you need to respond swiftly and immediately in order to manage the damage. We're all concerned about terrorism, and last but not least is a natural disaster. So we're going to start down there at the bottom with natural disaster and talk about what you can do to respond to, in an agile way, crisis that comes to your organization as the result of weather or other natural occurrences. We polled about 900, and I think it was 949 people, so we'll call it 950, on what they felt was the biggest threat to their organization. And certainly a cyber attack is on top of everyone's mind. But if you can see, natural disaster takes a very big piece of that pie, because we know there's not a lot we can do when a tornado comes through our neck of the woods, or flooding, or a hurricane, or an earthquake, or all of those types of things that can happen. And if you look to the right on your screen, or the red piece of the pie, we see a loss of life event is a high, has a concern number with it as well. And if we put those two pieces of the pie together, sorry, I just touched my screen because I do that when I talk, and I forgot that I have a touch screen now. When you put those two things together, we have about 30% of the folks that are concerned, because when there is a natural disaster, quite often, sadly, there's a loss of life that accompanies that. But I also want you then to look to the left, or the purple segment, that shows a significant reputation event, because the way you respond in a natural disaster, your organization's leadership profile becomes either a brand detriment or a brand attribute. So if we take these three pieces of the pie, really, natural disaster and its outlying effects are a concern to about 50% of you, and it should be a concern to 100%. So a lot of people say we just don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. And really our answer to that is, how can you not? How can you not have the bandwidth to protect the people in your organization, your property, your clients, your customers, and their ability to function, move forward in the future? So we want you to take a moment to think about the impact that natural disasters have had on organizations, exactly like yours. And we want to do a couple of things. I asked Jim Satterfield to be on the call today because I've worked with Jim now. First of all, he's our CEO, so it's a good idea. But I've worked with Jim now for about 6 years, and there is no one I'd rather call or have at my side in a crisis than Jim Satterfield. I know that because he's helped me through a couple. He's helped me through a personal crisis, through an illness in my family, and through a natural disaster. My area went through a natural disaster. And Jim's advice and counsel were superior. I also, of course, listen to Jim almost every day, work with clients from who have 50,000 employees to clients who have 5 employees. And what you need in a crisis is that someone who you can depend on for that critical decision support and calm demeanor. So that I wanted Jim on this call to lend to our conversation in that regard. But also because when I first joined Firestorm, I asked Jim, who is our biggest competitor? And Jim didn't hesitate when he said denial. He said there are too many organizations who say, it's really a shame about those guys over there, but it's never going to happen over here. I have to tell you, I don't think anybody thought Atlanta was going to burn one of their highways down recently. Maybe somebody said, I think that'll happen over there, but it's never going to happen over here. Well, it happened. They just reopened it. Fortunately, Jim was able to travel on it today to get to the airport. So what we want you to be able to do is get yourself out of disaster denial, take a moment to think about the impact that a natural disaster would have on an organization, and then ask the more important question of you, your team. For those of you that are joining in a conference room with a group of people, can you handle it? Could you handle it? What scenarios should we cover to make sure you'd be able to handle what comes next? The first thing we're going to talk about, and Jim, I'd like you to comment on why we start at the top level, hazard assessment, and then move into a well-designed and executed plan. Are you there, Jim? I think we lost Jim. So we're going to move on to talking about this particular image. This image is from Joplin, Missouri, and we worked with a couple of the folks from Joplin when the tragic tornado came through that area, and they were terrific. A woman named Susan Moore took about 100 images for us and gave us permission to use all of the images if it would help in teaching moments. So I want to really applaud Genevieve Williams, Rebecca Williams, and Susan for their openness documenting what happened and the rebuilding that is still going on. And the most important thing to remember for your organization is that, especially when senior leadership says we just don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't have the bandwidth, a well-executed plan will enable your company in a crisis to outperform your competitors. It's a brand attribute, and it meets and exceeds the expectations of your stakeholders. If plans are not updated to reflect current changes as well, you're going to open yourself up to unforeseen vulnerabilities. Now, best practices say we want to look at our plans once a year. 3 years, we want to look at them very carefully. So you don't have to look at each piece of your plan once a year. You want to go through a cyclical manner of reviewing your plans. But absolutely, every 3 years, you're going to have to look through in depth because the times they are changing. Vulnerabilities change. Weather patterns change. In my neck of the woods, we have had significant increasing flooding activities because we have so many new rooftops being built. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and they just added 5,000 new rooftops in an area very close to me. And suddenly, a quiet, peaceful, dry area has been flooding, not a little bit, but up to the second floor of people's condos in this one specific area. So we really have to understand how what's changing around us might affect our organizations. Jim Satterfield came up with the methodology that then to approach how we go about working with you to predict vulnerabilities, plan your responses, and then perform when events occur. So if you just work with your folks on this predict, plan, perform way of thinking, it helps categorize what they need to do and when they need to do it in a more simplified way. The predict phase is going to classify your critical vulnerabilities. Also, we're going to look at, in addition to hazards, all hazards, we're going to identify key emergency personnel. We're going to ascertain where the critical decisions happen and what support you have to do that. We're going to look for gaps, any gaps that you have that need to be filled today, because the time to realize that you don't have a resource or a person or a piece of equipment or something you need is not in the middle of a crisis or the middle of a disaster. We're going to also look at your infrastructure and supply chain needs and the suppliers of your suppliers. We want to make sure that you're doubly deep. And then we want to also define the communication requirements to all of those key stakeholder groups in the event that something should occur. We covered last month communication. You can find that paper on our website. And we talked about making sure that you identify all of your different stakeholder groups, from the board to your clients and customers, employees, family members of your employees, vendors, suppliers, community, key decision makers in your community, your local law enforcement, etc. We want to make sure that you are communicating with every key stakeholder group so that you're not missing any key communication that's required. Now, once you've done your predict phase, you now have to incorporate your plan, and that's the actual strategy. One of the most challenging things that happens to organizations, especially in the middle of a disaster, is that employees and others feel as if they've been shown where the plans are, but not how to implement and initiate them. So the plan phase develops your strategy, constructs your custom plan, because there are no two plans for any two organizations that are the same. We have different people, different strengths, different weaknesses, and different cultures. We then want to involve that appropriate personnel and make sure they're buying in and they're committed to a culture of preparedness. We don't want to give lip service to preparedness, and I think a lot of you are probably sitting there now and saying, well, I've been with an organization that's given lip service to this or to that, to training or to something else. And it's a problem within your culture, and this is something where we must take it seriously. There must be buy-in, and leadership must exemplify readiness and preparedness in order for the organization to buy in. And then the perform phase establishes the protocols for the implementation of the program. And again, there's community involvement, there's communications, but you've got to test. The time to test your plan, the time to test your people is not in the middle of a flood. You need test exercises, audits, reviews, updates, and then you need to make sure you're compliant. So when we talk about have you made a plan, I want you to just think about this picture for a moment. Joplin left 4,200 children in school. If you knew that school looked like, or you heard go through from your business, and you knew your child was at that school, and I know you would be jumping in your car and rushing to that location. Imagine if this is what you saw. And as we know, Joplin tore through businesses, it tore through homes, it destroyed a hospital. First responders were left with no one to tell them who to respond to and how. They still did a stellar job. And there was a secondary crisis in this school, and I want you to think about this for your own building. You're a school, or whether you're a multi-tenant corporate office building, or whether you own a large campus piece of land for your business. There was a secondary crisis in that there was a group of children who went down in the basement to take shelter from the tornado. And the pipes, the water pipes overhead burst and flooded that basement. We have more than just 3 observations of hazards that may occur. Physical security, we have physical analysis that we must do on our buildings and our properties. And we must have responsibility to make sure that the people within the walls of our, employed by our companies, are safe. Disaster readiness and enterprise value then go hand in hand. And one of the, on this page that we really for you is that promoting and enforcing a culture of readiness is going to protect your organizations. We've seen companies come and go, companies who can weather the storm, straightforward and honest when something has gone on, and companies that have hidden the truth. So please understand that the bottom line is that it will go to your company's corporate culture, and you must then promote and lead with it. So to close up this specific introductory, we want to start off with a threat analysis, a high-level crisis management program. Have that structure in place in advance to analyze your threats and the impacts. And then a hazard impact matrix is used to categorize your threats. So I'm in South Carolina. Threats are flooding and hurricanes. And I'm from New York originally, and I lived in Ohio for a really long time. So another one of the threats for me personally is that I don't know anything about hurricanes, and I don't know anything about flooding. I know a lot about snow. I can drive on the ice. I have done a 360 on the ice and did not wreck my car. I cannot, however, tell you what to do in a Category 3 hurricane other than bug out. So I've learned a lot since that time. So you have to look at your own specific area and your specific risks. Again, whether they be tornado, earthquake, or other hazards. Evaluate what the human, property, and business impacts will be for your organization, and then prioritize how you're going to go about addressing those hazard impacts. I want to point out something here. This was from Moore Tech, Oklahoma, and this was the path of the tornado that tore through Moore. And as you can see, behind where I have the title is the Moore Medical Center. That was impacted in the past, just like in Joplin. And then we have 2 elementary schools that were directly in the tornado's path. And there was a huge swath of damage through there. So you may even be some of you on the call today who are from or in Moore, Oklahoma, and know what that impact was. I lived in Kansas for a very short period of time in my life, and I can tell you that I am very grateful for shelters. And there were some folks who just were heroic in this specific instance. But imagine if you are a parent of a child at one of those schools, or your spouse, or you are working at the medical center and want to get to those schools. We really have to look at our physical location and then what's the worst case scenario and work back from the worst case scenario. Make sure you've trained everyone then in your organization on what to do before the crisis occurs. Because in an actual emergency, your plans can't be studied. When you're running down 100 flights of stairs, you don't have time to open a binder and look at it. Which also leads me to make the point that many plans and programs today can be as close as your smartphone. So we need to make sure that our people have the knowledge of what to do and where to find out what to do. Not just to find the information, but how to actually plan, how to actually put it into implementation. Then what to say and whom to say it to, that gets embedded into the culture of your organization. By the way, if you don't have a Twitter account, if you don't have a Facebook account, if you don't have a way of communicating to a broader audience in an immediate manner, you really need to have those set up in advance, and you need to be friends technologically with your local fire department, your local, your mayor's office, your local resources of any other type, because you may not be able to get a message to them any other way perhaps than through social media. During 911, I worked for an organization where at any given time, we figured we had about 300 people in the air flying to and fro across the world. And we had a significantly large office in New York, but our corporate office was in Boston. And so we had people flying back and forth between New York and Boston all the time. And we knew that we had 45 people about traveling that route on that day, and 6 of them were from our senior leadership team, and we weren't quite sure where anybody was exactly, and we didn't have a way to get in touch at that time. So we realized that we had to create internally, have a I'm safe book does today. So we created message boards so that people could check in. We also leveraged we had at that time to communicate with each other because email and other systems were down, but LinkedIn was still up. And we were able to get messages back and forth to each other via LinkedIn's messaging system. So don't discount your ability to communicate in a crisis in any creative outlet you may have. And to identify those opportunities that can be used, the only way you can accomplish that is through and training. I wanted to just make another point about communication. I touched on this briefly last month, but last month turned on 156 weather alert sirens, all at the same time for 2.5 hours. All sirens were active. It took them a while, and it was a hack. And you're thinking about how the hack was done, but the first thing I thought of, and I think some of you on this call probably think the same thing, is they can be hacked to go on, they can be hacked to go off. So we need to be our own first responders. We need to teach our folks how to monitor what's going on in the world, how to monitor weather, and weather is one of those things we get to monitor really well. We monitor for behavioral threats by looking at Facebook and social postings that are public. But weather is out there all the time. We have wonderful meteorological scientists in this country that can tell us well out in advance what's coming. They can't really tell us. We don't really know if an earthquake is coming. There are things that are precursors to it, and there are other weather events where it's challenging. But for the most part, weather is one thing we get more notice of than anything else. So we have to make sure that we are helping our employees understand the resources that are available to them, how to make sure that they're prepared to respond, and how they're prepared to respond with their own families. Because family will always trump work. We have a book. It's on our website. It's free to download as an e-book, or we can customize a hard copy for you, a soft hard copy. But it's Disaster Ready People for Disaster Ready America, and it's a great way to help assure that your people are going to be prepared and home. So when communication is to be considered, we like to break it down into 3 parts: coordination.
And Karen, I'm back if you'd like me to join.
Jim, you know, you've come back on a really good slide, and I'm glad you're back. You created coordination, crisis, and compliance. Why'd you do that?
One of the things that we found, there was a great deal of confusion around what should you be doing, what should you be communicating at the point of a crisis. So if you think about a crisis, we're focused on the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the communications that you give. And looking at communications, there's 3 levels of it. One is a level of coordination. What do you want people to do right now? What should they have in place? Where do you want them to go? What objectives do you have for them? Those will be the first communications in any crisis and are by far and away the most immediately important. Over time, we'll shift to communications around the crisis, brand, reputation. Those types of elements will come into play, but we have the luxury of time. We don't have to be talking about those initially. And then finally, communications around compliance. I heard Karen at the beginning talk about the ransomware over the weekend. If someone's identity or information or confidential areas have been disclosed, then there's an obligation to report. That's a compliance function associated with that. So as we think about a variety of different areas, it kind of helps to structure our communications and message maps around each of these. What's the first thing you'd say? What's the second? What's the third on each of these topics? And one other piece of advice. On the first day in a crisis, everything you learn is wrong. And so you want to be very careful with your communications at that point, and you don't want that communicator to be your CEO, your president, your head of school in those environments to look at other directions. Karen, back to you.
Oh, thank you, Jim. You know, I'm showing everyone a picture right now of a washed out road that was taken, excuse me, I have a little tickle in my throat, was taken here in my home state. Recently we had a 1,000-year flood event. We had a king tide and a tremendous amount of rain, and then we had Hurricane Matthew. And the ensuing
sounds like it took your voice too, Karen. I think it took the road and your voice out of the way. But the point Karen's making here is that your people aren't going to come to work. If there's a natural disaster, they can't get there. They can't get to that location. As you saw on some of the earlier slides in that direction, family trumps job. So Karen, have you got your voice back, and I'll be quiet?
I did. I thank you very much. Well, actually, Jim, if you could talk a little bit about, we have plans and programs in place where we help people, whether it be that a train system has gone down and people can't get to work, or Atlanta has burned one of their freeways down. What do you do when you can't get people to work, and how do you develop alternate plans?
Well, I think across all our plans, we think about three different conditions happening: loss of facility, loss of IT or technology, and finally, loss of people. When we think about a disaster, we hit many of those points in that particular equation. Are you in a business where individuals can work remotely from home? Are your systems in the cloud so you can maintain a level of contact there? If it's a manufacturing plant, that's not going to happen. We've all got to get to our location. So identifying how many people you need on the first day, the second, the third, the fourth, and how the business will ramp will make a significant difference. And that is defined with, when you look at the business impact analysis for the organization. If a particular department is out, what are the financial and operational impacts on our organization? What resources do we need to get it back? What's the order in which we restore departments? All of those criticalities come together at that time.
You know, I'm showing everyone a picture right now, Jim, that I took of a neighbor's house. There's a tree that came down, and our neighborhood got hit pretty bad. We have a ton of living oaks, and even though it was a mild hurricane, as storms go, there was a great deal of damage. And then, of course, we had that significant flooding event afterward. And I think the question that I asked you was, what was the longest you've ever had to go without power?
Well, we've had to be without power in Atlanta a little over a week. We had an ice storm. We were caring for my mom and my stepdad. We were dealing with Alzheimer's, and trying to keep a house warm by a fireplace in an ice storm is not an effective strategy. So as we think about each of these things, they come together. The people in that house aren't going to be at work tomorrow. Every crisis is a human crisis. And so those priorities go immediately to the top of the list of what you're going to focus on and what you're going to do. If we can maximize that, we can return sooner than others. We can make sure that our people are safe and those elements get handled. If we lose power, we go back in time 150 years. The cell phone I'm talking with you on right now, once that battery's out, if I don't have a way to recharge it, I've lost my lifeline and my communications ability. So looking at these, talking about these events before they occur, and putting the plans in place become a fundamental aspect of our program, no matter what your organization is.
And Jim, I got to tell you, I've never seen my husband look so attractive as the day he walked into the house with that generator. That was one of my favorite presents. And we were without power for a week. We had people just a block away from us who had power, but for some reason our specific area, they couldn't get the power back on for a while. Fortunately, we did have clean water, but our roads had washed out. So it's important to remember as the impact started to evolve. It's not the initial storm, but after the storm, we had the rain event that caused tremendous flooding, especially upstate and into North Carolina. And then as that water receded back to the ocean, it overwhelmed the rivers, it overran the banks, and it washed out bridges and roads. Children couldn't get to school, so parents couldn't get to work. And there was some pretty significant economic impacts in addition to the damage itself. So when we talk
and
about
it washed out the insurance coverages that were there, getting the insurance and where the insurance was going in each of these areas becomes very important. I recommend that everyone take their vulnerability risk analysis or their hazard impact analysis, whatever you call it, and share that with your insurance broker and ask them to describe how does our insurance interface with us in this type of an event. If you do a test exercise and you've created, whether it's a tabletop or a simulation, give that to your insurance broker and ask them to confirm, is coverage in fact in place? We did a cyber breach with a large financial services company, and there were 8 impacts associated with it. When we turned it over to the broker, we found out that 6 of the 8 impacts would not have been covered by their cyber breach insurance. The time to find that out is now, not in the middle of the crisis that's going on.
So we want to establish a formal plan. We want to create open source intelligence, document and test our critical decision structure, and develop appropriate crisis response strategies and crisis communications. Anything else you want to add to that list, Jim?
No, I think that's a good list. I believe coming up is the maturity model, and this is a model to look at what you're doing and how your team is functioning. After an event or a crisis, do a hot wash, go through this model, and rate yourself along the dimensions in the left-hand column. You'll see 4 stages spread across, going from a stage 1 where it's surprise and you're at great liability, all the way to stage 4 where it becomes a part of your culture. Every time you move through one of those stages, you've had a breakthrough. The last breakthrough is a value proposition, and we talk about transforming crisis into value. That's the genesis of all of the things that we're discussing. I'll be quiet as you do your wrap-up.
Well, Jim, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you joining us from the airport. I'd like everybody to ask themselves where your organization is today to be next year. Will you be in the same place, or will you move forward in your own performance maturity rating? As I can download a copy of today's paper from our website under firestorm.com. I would like to give Mary an opportunity to say something out there.
Much, Karen and Jim, and thank you for a great program today. My main takeaway was promote and lead with a culture of readiness, and I really liked that to think about. And I also want to promote our Leadership Agility workshop that's coming up in September 19th through the 21st in Birmingham.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone and the University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies. You can visit their website. And you can Firestorm.com to find out more programs. We hope everybody has a great spring day. Mary, it was a pleasure to have you with us today. Enjoy those flowers on campus. And Jim, stay safe. Have a great flight. And that will conclude our session for today. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.